Today what we'd like to talk about is bias. Bias in our studies. And so bias is the degree to which a procedure systematically overestimates or underestimates a population value. So this is like looking at a sample and there are things that you may do unintentionally or intentionally that can affect your results. Okay? So a study conducted by a procedure that tends to overestimate or underestimate a population value is said to be biased. And whenever we talk about overestimating or underestimating, now if we get an accurate representation of our population, then it's going to be more unbiased. In other words, there's not going to be the same factors that would affect the outcome. It can still be an extremely low number or an extremely high number, but there's not those other items that might affect it or bring it up. Or I usually relate this to essay questions on exams, okay? Because some professors, you can write approximately the same thing or word it a slightly different than another student, and one student receives a higher grade than the other. It's because it's subjective. The reader or instructor or whoever is looking at this paper reads through it, and there's certain things that they like about this person's writing style, or maybe they know who it is, and therefore they get that little bit of a leg up. Or they know who the paper belongs to, and you've been a real problem in class, and so maybe they're going to specifically look for things to take off. Now, let me just say this note. If an instructor is truly in the field for education, they are going to try to be as unbiased as they can. They do not bring their personal feelings into their grading. I'll admit, some of the time I thought my professors did, but maybe it was because I didn't have a larger vocabulary. I didn't use the 50-cent words, I used the 5-cent words. That type of thing, okay? So like I said, what instructors try to do is they try to get the correct result on average, and that's said to be unbiased. Very seldom can we take out all types of biasness. Medical studies, we definitely want to. Other things, we purposely put in biasness. In the education system, we try to eliminate as many biases as possible. But let's just face it, we're all human. There's a possibility of someone becoming a little bit biased towards one person or the other. Not that we like it, but think about a job. You get off on the wrong foot, some of your coworkers are gonna not be as friendly or make your job a little bit harder. Those are biasness that are just natural in the world. We try to be as unbiased as possible, but it doesn't always happen. So sources of bias. The first one is voluntary response bias. That key word, voluntary response. Voluntary response creates a bias in itself. Go back to the different types of sampling whenever we talked about convenient sampling and voluntary response sampling. And I mentioned that there was a little bit of bias in there. Because usually with voluntary response, people don't have to answer. They don't have to respond to the question. And therefore you get only certain groups that are going to respond. Again, how many times have we had a pop-up ad on our computers that had a survey, well, it doesn't say that you must respond before you move on. It's just voluntary. Sometimes, depends on the company. I may do it. I may not really like them. I may not really dislike them. But I may go ahead and do it so that they get a little bit more accurate reading. The next type of bias is self-interest. And in a lot of ways, self-interest and voluntary response go a little bit hand in hand. Because on both of these, you tend to get the people to respond that have strong feelings one way or the other for it. Okay? Think about the Major League Baseball and the All-Star selection. Had a chance to vote for those that you wanted. You can also think of these as some of the TV shows where there's contests and you get to call in and vote. Dancing with the Stars, I believe, is one of them. You get that voluntary response because, number one, are you going to take the time to do it? We're all busy. And so we may not see that it is of a need for us to respond. So that's a voluntary response. It's also a self-interest bias because of the fact, those of you that don't care about baseball, or those of you that don't watch Dancing with the Stars or similar shows, you're not going to respond to those things. You have no interest in it. And I will be very honest with you. Our presidential elections and our elections in general have a voluntary response bias as well as a self-interest bias to them. Because think about it, if you don't like either one of the candidates, you don't see a point in responding or voting. There are many adults that are not registered voters because they select not to. That is voluntary for them. Now, if you have two different candidates that are complete opposites, one's conservative, one's extremely liberal, you like the one that's liberal, or maybe you like the one that's conservative, not based off of all of their credentials or anything, you just know there are certain topics that you really, really identify with one candidate or the other. That's going to be almost like a self-interest type bias. And trust me, political voting is all about voluntary response and self-interest most of the time. The other way that it can be identified is social acceptability. We don't see social acceptability a lot in, say, our online surveys or our mail-in surveys. Social acceptability is really identified when you're in a one-on-one type of interview. Or maybe you're in the classroom setting and the teacher says, okay, we can have the test today or we can push it back till tomorrow. Who wants it today? And you see that almost everybody's hand goes up. Well, you really want it tomorrow, but you don't want to be the only one left out, so you go ahead and raise your hand. That is actually a social acceptability bias because you're going with the majority. In light of all of the school shootings that have gone on in the past several years, you may be asked a question. Do you agree with public school teachers being able to carry a gun? If you're at home or online, you're more likely to answer honestly, or even if you're in a group of people that are like-minded as you're more likely to answer honestly as to what you believe versus you're in a group and you're not real sure how they feel but you hear a couple of people speak out, so yeah, I'm going to go with whatever they say. You're not going to be extremely honest about it. We see social acceptability bias in so many ways that we don't really think about it anymore. What radio station did you turn it to? Was there somebody else in the car? Let's say you're a kid and your parents don't want you listening to certain types of music. Now, of course, it won't apply to you in this class, but think about whenever you were younger. Were there certain TV shows or music that your parents didn't want you to watch or listen to? So whenever they were around, you didn't do it? Whenever you were being social with them, you didn't do it? But with your friends who liked it, did you listen to that type of music? That's a social acceptability bias there. Because it's whoever you're with, it kind of changes whatever you're wanting to listen to or something. Leading question bias. Leading questions, especially in verbal interviews, sometimes in written responses. Leading questions are some of those that say, well, since the rest of your class agrees with this, do you agree with this? You're kind of setting the person that's being interviewed up to answer a certain way. Because you are leading them stating, hey, the rest of the class already wants this. Do you want this also? Instead of asking just, what would you prefer? They're kind of leading you into the response that they want. You go out to a group and maybe there's a political protest going on. You don't really know what's going on, but somebody comes up to me, hey, you believe that this happened, don't you? Well, you may or may not, but honestly, a lot of times it's easier to just say, yeah, I do, or whatever the rest of the crowd's going with. So those leading questions can be those where the interviewer actually influences the outcome based on the way that they read it, because it can also be, would you prefer to have the test today or tomorrow? Versus, would you prefer to have the test today or tomorrow? You can even hear it in the tone of the interviewer at times, because they're kind of predicting what you'll say or actually trying to get you to respond in a certain way. Another type of bias is the non-response bias. This is very similar to the voluntary response, because voluntary response, it's completely up to you whether you respond or not. That is a bias in itself, because most of the time those people that respond really like it or really don't like it. They have strong feelings about it. Non-response also gives us a different type of bias, because maybe not enough people really responded to the survey to get an accurate look at it. And we'll talk later about sample sizes and that type of thing, but maybe you sent out 500 surveys and you only got 5 back. It's not a really good response percentage. So you have that non-response bias there. There's also the sampling bias. Remember, we've discussed the different types of sampling: simple random sample, the convenience sample, the stratified, the cluster sampling, the systematic sampling. How you sample can actually predict your outcome or can overestimate or underestimate your outcome. let's say that we're looking at different public schools in the state of Texas, and we're looking at nationality of the students. If you just survey, let's say, those down by San Antonio and the Rio Grande area, you're probably going to have a much higher percentage of one nationality versus if you sample those up in the Panhandle or North Texas around the Dallas area. It also kind of changes. Are you sampling all larger schools or all smaller schools? Those are some things to look at. If you want a true representation of the state of Texas, really you need to sample some small, some large, and some small and some large in each of the areas of the state. This is also where convenience sampling comes in. You just got the people near you and ask them, well, are the people near you really a good representation of the entire population? They may be, but more than likely they're probably not. Okay? So I want you to look at these different types of bias and see if you can identify other ways, or even maybe on a survey that you've taken recently or anything like that, can you identify, yeah, there are probably leading questions. Or, yeah, I answered this way because everybody else was answering that way. And see if you can identify why that might cause a problem. Or maybe you don't think that bias causes a problem. That's kind of up to you, okay? But go ahead and look at these different types and then let me know if you have any questions.